You hear about medieval cavalry charges, knights in shining armor, crusader victories blessed by God, but nobody talks about the numbers at Muret, September 12th, 1213, 25 kilometers south of Toulouse, 900 crusader cavalry against thousands. A king who wore a crown just 1 year before dies in borrowed armor. His army shatters in minutes. Count Raymond of Toulouse watches from the field as his entire coalition collapses. The Garonne River runs red with fleeing militia. This is not legend. This is documented. The Albigensian Crusade produced 3 major chronicles. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay wrote Historia Albigensis between 1213 and 1218 while traveling with the Crusaders. The Chanson de la Croisade albigeoise gives us the Occitan perspective from both Guillaume de Tudela and his anonymous continuator. William of Puylaurens completed his chronicle decades later, but drew from earlier sources and personal memory. All 3 record Muret. All 3 agree on the outcome. A catastrophic defeat that ended Aragonese ambitions north of the Pyrenees forever. Why does a crusader king die fighting other crusaders? How does a force of 1,600 men destroy an army triple or quadruple its size? What happened in those brutal minutes that changed southern France forever? Languedoc in 1213 is a crossroads. The county of Toulouse controls vast territories from the Mediterranean to the Garonne. Count Raymond VI rules from Toulouse, a city of perhaps 30,000 souls. His brother-in-law across the Pyrenees is Peter II of Aragon, called Peter the Catholic. The Pope crowned Peter himself in Rome in 1205. Peter swore to defend the faith. 1 year before Muret, Peter stands at Las Navas de Tolosa on July 16, 1212. He commands the left wing of the Christian army. King Alfonso VIII of Castile holds the center. King Sancho VII of Navarre takes the right. They face Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir and perhaps 60,000 Almohad warriors. The Christians charge. The Muslim lines break. The Caliph flees to Seville. Alfonso writes to Pope Innocent III claiming 100,000 Muslim dead for only 20 or 30 Christian casualties. The numbers are impossible, but the victory is real. Peter returns home a hero, champion of Christendom, slayer of the Moors. Autumn 1212. Peter finds Languedoc burning. Simon de Montfort the Elder has spent 3 years conquering the south. Simon is not some minor knight. He is Baron de Montfort Lamourie in Normandy, 5th Earl of Leicester through his mother Amicia de Beaumont. He refused to sack Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1202, left the crusade altogether rather than attack fellow Christians. In 1208, Pope Innocent III calls for crusade against the Cathars, heretics who reject the Catholic Church. Simon reluctantly accepts command when Arnaud Amalric, abbot of Citeaux, orders him in the Pope's name. By 1212, Simon has conquered Béziers, Carcassonne, Minerve, where he burns 140 Cathars who refuse to recant. At Bram, he mutilates prisoners, gouges out their eyes, cuts off their ears, noses, lips, leaves one man with a single eye to lead them into Les Tours as a warning. Simon takes Toulouse itself in the spring of 1213. Raymond VI flees into exile. The lands of the House of Saint-Gilles, held for generations, fall to a Norman lord in 3 years. Peter's vassals in southern France send desperate appeals. The Count of Foix, the Count of Comminges, local lords who owe fealty to Aragon. Simon is conquering their lands, absorbing them into his domain, growing more powerful than his nominal lord. King Philip II of France. Peter sends envoys to Rome. So does Simon. Both lobby Pope Innocent III. A church council convenes at Lavore. Peter is not allowed to speak, only to submit written arguments. The Pope sides with his crusaders. Peter's options narrow. He can watch his influence in Languedoc evaporate. Or he can act. He chooses the sword. If you value documented medieval military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Historia Albigensis of Pierre de Vaux de Cernay, published in its critical edition by P. Gabin and E. Lyon between 1926 and 1939, and The Occitan War by Lawrence W. Marvin, published by Cambridge University Press in 2008, which provides the most detailed modern military analysis of the entire Albigensian Crusade based on contemporary sources, archaeological evidence, and terrain studies. Marvin's work specifically addresses the force compositions and tactical movements at Muret using primary source analysis that corrects earlier misconceptions. Now back to the information. September 10th, 1213, Peter's army arrives at Muret. The town sits on high ground where the Luge stream meets the Garonne. Stone walls, a small garrison. Simon holds the fortress with perhaps 800 crusaders. The rest of his infantry, maybe 300 to 700 men, stays inside to defend the walls. Peter brings 800 to 1,000 Aragonese cavalry, heavy horse, knights in mail and plate. Raymond VI arrives with 2,000 to 4,000 militia from Toulouse. The Count of Foix brings his cavalry. The Count of Comminges brings his. Historians using contemporary chronicles by Pierre de Vaux de Cernay and later analysis by Lawrence Marvin, Spencer Tucker, and Clifford Rogers estimate Peter's combined force at 4,000 to 8,000 men. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay claims 100,000, but this is propaganda. Modern scholarship using logistics, supply needs, and known force structures puts the real number much lower. Still, Peter outnumbers Simon at least 2 to 1, probably 3 or 4 to 1. Peter positions his army on the left bank of the Garonne. Right flank protected by the Saudron tributary. Left flank by marshland. The Toulousain militia begins assaulting the town walls. Peter's cavalry waits in 3 divisions. The Count of Foix commands the first line. Peter himself takes the second. Raymond VI and the Count of Comminges hold the rear. Peter makes a decision that will kill him. He removes his royal armor, puts on the plain mail of a common knight. Some sources say he wants to fight like his men. Others say he wants to avoid being a target. Either way, the King of Aragon becomes invisible on his own battlefield. September 11th. Negotiations. Bishops from Simon's camp meet with Peter's representatives. The north gate of Muret, closest to the Aragonese camp, stays open. Some chronicles say by design, others say by mistake. The Count of Foix sees the opening, orders an assault. Spanish cavalry and Toulousain infantry rush the narrow luge bridge. They jam together, cavalry and foot mixed. No room to maneuver. Simon's garrison drives them back. September 12th, 1213, dawn. Simon de Montfort hears mass in Muret. His situation is desperate, outnumbered, besieged, running low on supplies. A rational commander would negotiate, try to buy time, wait for reinforcements. Simon does the opposite. He decides to attack. 870 cavalry according to some sources, 900 according to others, 260 are full knights. The rest are mounted sergeants. This is the cream of Crusader heavy cavalry, veterans of 3 years of brutal campaigning. They know each other, trust each other. Fight as a unit. Simon divides his cavalry into 3 squadrons. His half-brother, William de Bar, also called William of Bars, commands the first line. Simon's brother-in-law, Bouchard de Marly, leads the second. Simon himself takes the third, command and control. He can see the entire field from the rear, can commit his reserve where needed, can exploit any breakthrough. The Crusaders ride out through the western gate. Across the Lauge stream, Peter's army waits on the plain, static, defensive. Raymond VI urges a defensive posture. Let Simon's cavalry tire themselves charging uphill. Hit them with arrows, javelins, bleed them as they approach. Peter the Catholic, champion of Las Navas, rejects this. He calls it unknightly, dishonorable. He will meet the Crusaders in open battle, cavalry against cavalry. The way of war. William de Bars leads the charge. 600 Crusader horsemen in 2 lines thunder toward Peter's center. They aim for the Count of Foix's division. The impetus of the charge is everything, mass times velocity. 1,500 pounds of horse and rider moving at 20 miles per hour. Lances extended. 3 lines of men and horses compressed into a steel wedge. They hit the Count of Foix's line like a falling mountain. The Aragonese first line shatters. Knights go down, horses scream. The Crusaders break through to the second line, Peter's division. The King of Aragon is somewhere in that mass of men and metal, fighting like a common soldier. No royal banner, no identifying armor, just another knight in the chaos. Simon de Montfort sees the breakthrough. Leads his 3rd squadron left. Flanking movement, catches Peter's cavalry from the side. The Aragonese formation disintegrates. Men wheel their horses. Try to regroup, can't. The Crusader wedge is already through them, cutting, killing, pushing them back. Somewhere in that melee, a sword finds Peter the Catholic. Some chronicles say he was killed in the initial clash. Others say Crusaders hunted for his standard in the second line, found him fighting without royal insignia. One account records his last words. He shouts, "I am the king." Nobody hears him in the thunder of battle, or nobody cares. He goes down, dies in the mud at Muret. 1 year after his triumph at Las Navas de Tolosa, 35 years old, word spreads through the Aragonese cavalry. The king is dead. Panic takes them. Units break. Men spur their horses away from the Crusader lances. The Count of Foix tries to rally them. Can't. The army is dissolving. Simon's first 2 lines pursue. Cut down fleeing cavalrymen. Simon himself rallies his 3rd squadron. Holds them in reserve. Watches for any organized resistance. Finds none. The Aragonese cavalry is finished. Montfort turns back toward Muret. The Toulousain militia is still assaulting the walls. Perhaps 2,000 to 4,000 men. Commoners with spears, crossbows, knives, they see the Crusader cavalry returning, see their own cavalry in flight, learn that Peter of Aragon is dead. The militia breaks, abandons their siege equipment, runs for their fortified camp in the Garonne beyond. The Crusaders don't let them go. 870 horsemen against thousands of running infantry. The militia reaches the river, tries to cross, can't swim in armor, can't organize a fighting retreat. The cavalry rides them down in the shallows, cuts them apart as they wade through the water. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay claims 20,000 dead. This is impossible. Modern historians using battlefield space, time of engagement, and Crusader force size estimate 7,000 to 15,000 casualties among the combined Aragonese and Toulousain forces. Most are militia killed in the rout. The Crusaders lose perhaps 100 men. Some sources say as few as 8 killed. Charles Oman, in his analysis of medieval warfare, calls Muret the most remarkable triumph ever won by a force entirely composed of cavalry over an enemy using both horse and foot. The aftermath is immediate and brutal. Peter's body is recovered from the field. His 5-year-old son James is in Simon de Montfort's custody, had been since before the battle, a hostage for Peter's good behavior. Now James is an orphan and a pawn. He will become James I, called the Conqueror, King of Aragon. But in September 1213, he is a child in the hands of his father's killer. Count Raymond VI escapes with his cavalry, flees toward Toulouse, watches his entire coalition collapse in less than an hour. Simon takes control of Toulouse. The Fourth Council of the Lateran in 1215 officially proclaims Simon Count of Toulouse. All Raymond's conquered lands go to the Norman Crusader. The treaty strips the House of Saint-Gilles of generations of territory, places them under Simon's control. But Muret is not the end. Raymond and his son Raymond VII return from exile in April 1216, raise a new army from disaffected towns, besiege Beaucaire. Simon rushes to break the siege. Can't. His garrison runs out of supplies, eats their horses, surrenders in exchange for their lives. The southern resistance revives. In September 1217, Raymond VII retakes Toulouse. Simon besieges the city, but his force is too small to encircle the walls. Food enters Toulouse. Simon's Crusaders starve outside. June 25th, 1218. Toulouse. Simon attends Mass. During the service, he learns the defenders have launched a sortie. He refuses to leave church before Mass ends, arrives late to the battle. A trebuchet stone hits him in the head. He dies instantly. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay records that a stone launched from the city struck him on his helmet. The blow was so great that his eyes, brain, teeth, forehead, and jaw were all smashed to pieces, and he fell dead on the ground. The crusade continues without Simon, but it is no longer his war. His son, Amaury, takes command, lacks his father's military genius. By 1222, Raymond VII has reclaimed all lost territories. King Louis VIII of France leads a fresh crusade in 1226. Raymond VII is excommunicated again. The Council of Bourges authorizes a tax os, the Albigensian 10th, to fund the war. But the Cathar resistance is broken. The Treaty of Paris in 1229 officially ends the crusade. Raymond VII is recognized as Count of Toulouse, but must cede his castles to royal control, must suppress the remaining Cathars. In March 1244, the fortress of Montségur falls. 220 Cathars are burned at the stake. The last major Cathar stronghold is gone. The political consequences of Muret echo for centuries. Aragonese influence north of the Pyrenees ends on September 12th, 1213. The crown of France fills the vacuum. The Capetian dynasty extends its control south. Languedoc, independent for generations, becomes French. The distinct Occitan culture diminishes. The Languedoc, language of the south, gives way to the Languedois of the north. The troubadour tradition fades. The sophisticated courts of southern France disappear. Northern French law, language, and administration replace them. Historian H. J. Chater will later call the Aragonese Crusade of 1284 perhaps the most unjust, unnecessary, and calamitous enterprise ever undertaken by the Capetian monarchy. But Muret happens 71 years earlier. It is the Albigensian Crusade, not the Aragonese one, that destroys Occitan independence, and Muret is its decisive battle. Military historians study Muret for its tactical lessons. How does Simon de Montfort win? First, intelligence. He knows Peter's position, knows the ground, knows his enemy's deployment. Second, surprise. Peter expects a siege, not a sortie. Third, concentration of force. Simon commits his entire cavalry strength to one devastating charge, doesn't hold back at reserves until the enemy formation breaks. Fourth, exploiting success. When William de Bars breaks through Peter's first line, Simon immediately commits his third squadron to widen the breach. Fifth, pursuit. Simon's cavalry doesn't stop when the enemy cavalry flees. They pursue. They destroy the infantry. They turn a battlefield victory into a strategic catastrophe. Peter makes multiple fatal mistakes. He positions his army statically, gives up his mobility advantage. He rejects Raymond's sound tactical advice to use missile weapons against the charging cavalry. He disguises himself as a common soldier, removes the one symbol that might rally his men after setbacks. When he falls, nobody knows the king is dead until it is too late to stabilize the line. He allows his force to remain in 3 separate divisions without unified command. When the first line breaks, the second and third don't move to support it. The army fights as 3 separate units instead of one coordinated force. The sources are remarkably consistent on the core facts. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay inflates numbers for propaganda purposes, but accurately describes the battle's progression. The anonymous continuator of the Chanson de la Croisade, writing from the Occitan perspective and hostile to the Crusaders, confirms Peter's death, the rout of the cavalry, and the slaughter at the Garonne. William of Puylaurens, writing decades later but drawing on earlier sources, provides the political context. Modern historians, Lawrence Marvin, Jonathan Sumption, Martin Elvira Cabrer, and Charles Oman all cite these primary sources. Marvin's The Occitan War, published in 2008 by Cambridge University Press, remains the most detailed English-language military history of the entire crusade. Elvira Cabrer's El Jueves de Muret, published in Barcelona in 2002 by the Universitat de Barcelona, is the definitive Spanish-language study. Both use archaeological evidence, terrain analysis, and comparative studies of contemporary battles to reconstruct the engagement. The medieval sources tell us specific details that ring true. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay describes Simon attending Mass before the battle. This matches Simon's documented piety throughout the crusade. The detail about Peter wearing borrowed armor appears in multiple sources. The cry, "I am the king," before Peter's death is recorded in at least 2 chronicles. These are not the kind of details medieval propagandists typically invent. They are the kind eyewitnesses remember. The casualty figures remain disputed. 7,000 to 15,000 dead in one battle seems enormous, but the rout at the Garonne creates conditions for mass slaughter. Thousands of unarmored militia trapped against a river, 870 horsemen with lances, hours of daylight remaining. The math is brutal, but plausible. For comparison, the Battle of Towton in 1461 produces perhaps 28,000 casualties over 10 hours. Agincourt in 1415 kills 6,000 to 8,000 Frenchmen in 3 hours. Muret's numbers, while high, fit within the spectrum of medieval massacre. Simon de Montfort never enjoys his victories. After Muret, he campaigns for 5 more years, takes Toulouse, loses it, takes it again, besieges it a final time. The trebuchet stone that kills him is reportedly launched by a team that includes women from the city. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay writes that a stone struck him on his helmet and he fell dead on the ground. Contemporary chronicles say his skull was shattered, his brain, teeth, and jaw destroyed. He is 48 years old, has spent 10 years fighting in southern France, has conquered more territory than any crusader since the First Crusade, dies within sight of the walls of the city he can never quite subdue. His body is taken to the monastery of Haute-Bruyère for burial. His eldest son, Amaury, inherits the French estates. His youngest son, also named Simon, inherits the English titles. This younger Simon becomes the Simon de Montfort of English history. The baron who leads the second barons, war against Henry III, who forces the king to accept the provisions of Oxford in 1258, who summons the first English Parliament in 1265, who dies at the Battle of Evesham that same year, the elder Simon at Muret, the younger Simon at Evesham, both crusaders, both rebels against royal authority, both killed in battle, both remembered as champions by some and tyrants by others. For Aragon, Muret is the end of northern ambitions. James I grows up, becomes a great king, conquers Valencia. Conquers Majorca, extends Aragonese power across the Mediterranean. But he never seriously attempts to recover his father's lost influence in Languedoc. The Pyrenees become a real border instead of a permeable frontier. The Kingdom of Aragon looks east and south. The Kingdom of France consolidates the south. For Toulouse, Muret is a disaster that becomes a rallying cry. Raymond VII fights for 6 more years after his father's death, reclaims the city, holds it against royal armies. The Treaty of Paris in 1229 gives him recognition as count, but at a terrible price. Royal castles in his territory. French garrisons, French law. The county is independent in name only. Within a generation, it will be fully absorbed into the French crown. For the Cathars, Muret is the beginning of the end. The battle destroys the military force that might have protected them. After 1213, resistance becomes guerrilla warfare, castle holdouts, individual martyrdom. By 1244, even these are gone. The faith doesn't disappear immediately. Cathar believers continue practicing in secret for decades, but the institutional structure is shattered. The perfect, the Cathar spiritual elite, are hunted, captured, burned. The Catholic Church establishes the Papal Inquisition in 1233, specifically to root out remaining heresy. The techniques of interrogation, torture, and punishment developed against Cathars become templates for later inquisitions across Europe. If you value documented medieval political and military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. The battlefield itself survives, in name only. Modern Muret is a suburb of Toulouse. The A64 highway cuts through the area. The medieval fortress is gone, the Luge still meets the Garonne, but the banks are developed. Housing, industry, roads. In 1213, this was open ground, cavalry country. A plain where 900 horsemen could form into 3 squadrons and charge, where thousands could run for their lives toward a river that became a killing ground. But the sources remain. The Historia Albigensis, the Chanson de la Croisade, William of Toulousain's Chronicle. These texts survived centuries of war, revolution, and neglect. They sit in libraries now. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France holds manuscripts of Pierre de Vaux de Cernay, the critical edition by P, Guébin, and A. Lyon, published between 1926 and 1939, made the full text available to scholars. Modern historians can read what Pierre wrote within 5 years of the battle, can compare his account with the Occitan's sources, can check his numbers against logistics, terrain, and comparative battles. The story holds up. The numbers at Muret tell the truth. 900 cavalry, 1,600 total crusaders, including the garrison, 4,000 to 8,000 in Peter's coalition, 7,000 to 15,000 casualties, mostly in the rout. 1 king dead, 1 count dispossessed, 1 region conquered. These are not estimates or legends. They are documented facts recorded by eyewitnesses and near-contemporary chroniclers, analyzed by modern scholars using archaeological evidence and comparative military history. September 12th, 1213, 25 kilometers south of Toulouse. The sun rises on an army of thousands, sets on a field of corpses. Peter the Catholic, who stood at Las Navas de Tolosa 1 year before and watched the Muslim lines break, lies dead in borrowed armor. Simon de Montfort, who refused to sack Constantinople because it was unchristian, has just slaughtered thousands of Christians and called it God's work. Count Raymond of Toulouse, whose family has ruled Languedoc for generations, is fleeing toward a city he will take and lose and take again before dying in exile. The river runs red. The crows gather. The crusade continues. This is not the end of the Albigensian War. That comes 16 years later with the Treaty of Paris. This is not even the end of Simon de Montfort. He has 5 more years of campaigning ahead of him. 5 more years of conquering and losing and reconquering the same fortress towns. 5 more years of mass before battle and trebuchet stones after. But Muret is the hinge moment. The battle that breaks Aragonese power north of the Pyrenees. The battle that makes southern France French. The battle that shows a smaller force with better leadership, better tactics, and better discipline can destroy an army, triple or quadruple its size if that army makes enough mistakes and fate provides one brilliant moment of opportunity. Pierre de Vaux de Cernay calls it a miracle, attributes the victory to divine intervention, claims God's hand guided the Crusader lances. William of Toulouse, more balanced in his judgments, focuses on Peter's errors, the rejection of good tactical advice, the fatal decision to disguise himself, the static defensive position that surrendered mobility, Lawrence Marvin. Writing in 2008 with 8 centuries of hindsight and access to military archives, terrain studies, and comparative analysis, identifies the specific tactical decisions that determined the outcome, the concentration of force, the timing of Simon's flanking maneuver, the relentless pursuit that turned defeat into annihilation. No miracles required, just war at its most efficient and brutal. The medieval chroniclers wanted their readers to see God's hand in the outcome, the Catholic Crusaders defeating the heretic protector, the righteous small force overcoming the sinful multitude. We can read their accounts differently now. We can see the intelligence work that told Simon exactly where Peter would be, the disciplined cavalry that could form 3 squadrons, charge in perfect order, break through enemy lines, and reform to pursue. The desperate commander who bet everything on one decisive attack because he had nothing to lose, the proud king who rejected sound advice and paid for it with his life and his army. The sources give us one more detail. After the battle, Simon de Montfort has a chapel built in the church of Saint-Jacques in Muret, dedicates it to Our Lady of the Rosary, a thanksgiving for victory. The chapel survives into the modern era. Visitors can still see it, still read the dedication, still understand that on this ground, on September 12th, after 1213, Simon de Montfort won the most remarkable cavalry victory of the High Middle Ages and changed the map of Europe. The Count of Foix, who commanded Peter's first division at Muret, survives the battle, escapes the rout, lives to fight Simon for 5 more years. In 1229, he makes peace with the French crown, retains his county. His grandson, Gaston VII, becomes known as Gaston Froissart, fights in the 100 Years' War. The line continues. But the Counts of Foix never again challenged French supremacy in the south. Muret taught them the cost of that gamble. Raymond VII, who reclaims Toulouse in 1217 and holds it against royal armies for years, dies in 1249, 52 years old, never fully recovers the power his father held. His daughter Joan marries Alphonse of Poitiers, brother of King Louis IX of France. When Joan and Alphonse die childless in 1271, Toulouse passes to the French crown. The House of Saint-Gilles ends. 400 years of independent rule, finished. The process begins at Muret. James I of Aragon, orphaned at age 5 by the battle, reigns for 63 years, dies in 1276, conquers Valencia from the Moors in 1238, takes Majorca in 1231, creates the crown of Aragon as a Mediterranean power. But he signs the Treaty of Corbeil in 1258 Vars, renouncing all Aragonese claims to lands north of the Pyrenees in exchange for French renunciation of claims to Catalonia. The treaty makes permanent what Muret made inevitable. The Pyrenees as border, not crossroads. Historians still debate exact casualty figures, still argue about Peter's motivations, still reconstruct the precise tactical movements of Simon's 3 squadrons, but they don't debate the outcome. Peter dead, the coalition destroyed, Toulouse conquered, Languedoc absorbed into the French kingdom, the Cathars systematically eliminated over the next 3 decades. All consequences flow from one day, one battle, 1 hour of decision. 25 years after Muret, in 1238, Ars, a monk in a scriptorium somewhere in southern France, copies out Pierre de Vaux de Cernay's Historia, writes the Latin text onto vellum, describes the Crusaders riding out from Muret, the charge, the breakthrough, the death of the king, the rout at the river. He was not there, never saw the battle, but he knows someone who did, or he reads an earlier copy, or he draws on collective memory still raw a generation later. He writes it down. The manuscript survives. 800 years later, we can read what he wrote. Can track the Crusader squadrons across the field, can follow the fleeing militia to the Garonne, can count the dead. This is documented history, not legend, not myth, not propaganda, though the sources contain propaganda. The facts underneath remain solid. 900 cavalry destroyed thousands. A king died because he valued honor over tactics. A Crusader commander made perfect decisions for 60 brutal minutes and changed the political map of southern Europe. The river at Muret ran red on September 12, 1213. The sources say so. The modern historians confirm it. The ground itself, though built over now, remembers. The stone that strikes Simon de Montfort on June 25, 1218, does more than kill a man. It shatters an army. Simon was the crusade, his personal genius, his religious certainty, his tactical brilliance, and his unifying terror held the northern enterprise together. His son, Amaury de Montfort, inherits the titles, the county of Toulouse, the earldom of Leicester, but he does not inherit the father's fire. Amaury is a competent nobleman, but a mediocre general. The coalition of northern barons, held in place by Simon's gravity, begins to splinter. They have served their 40 days. They have fought for God. Now, with the architect of their victories dead, they want to go home. Count Raymond VII, son of the dispossessed Raymond VI, sees his moment. He had retaken Toulouse in September 1217, precipitating the final siege that killed Simon. Now he presses his advantage. Raymond is his father's son. But he is also a skilled politician and a capable soldier. He understands the land, he understands his people. The Occitan lords, who bent the knee to Simon's iron fist, now rise up. The Count of Foix, the Count of Comminges. Towns that had surrendered to the Crusaders massacre their northern garrisons. The south is an open, unified revolt. Amaury de Montfort tries to hold his father's conquests. He fails. He lays siege to Castelnaudary in 1220. Raymond VII marches to relieve it. The battle is a bloody, tactical draw, but a strategic disaster for Amaury. He cannot break Raymond's army. He cannot afford the losses. His resources dwindle. His barons leave. For 6 years he fights a losing war. He loses Carcassonne. He loses Béziers. He's pushed back, step by step, until he holds almost nothing his father won. In 1224, Simon de Montfort abandons Languedoc. He returns to his estates in the north, the Ile-de-France. He signs his claims to the county of Toulouse over to the King of France, Louis VIII. The Montfort Crusade is over. Raymond VII is master of Languedoc. It is a victory, but it is a temporary one. The problem is no longer Simon de Montfort. The problem is the French crown and the Pope. In 1222, Pope Honorius III excommunicates Raymond VII. Raymond, like his father, is branded a protector of heretics, a friend to Cathars. The Pope turns to the new King of France, Louis VIII, called the Lion. Philip Augustus, Louis's father, had always been reluctant to intervene directly. He was happy to let his barons fight and bleed in the south while he consolidated power in the north. Louis VIII is different. He's pious. He is ambitious. He sees the crusade as a tool of state, a way to finally permanently bring the vast, independent south under the control of Paris. In 1226, the Royal Crusade begins. This is not an army of ambitious barons. This is the full might of the Capetian dynasty. Louis VIII marches south with a force historians estimate at 50,000 men. It is the largest army seen in France for a generation. The towns of Languedoc, which had resisted Simon for a decade, fold. They have no answer to this. Béziers, Carcassonne, Albi, they all submit without a fight. The only major resistance comes from Avignon. The city refuses the royal army passage. The siege of Avignon lasts 3 months. It is brutal. Disease sweeps the royal camp. Dysentery, fever. Thousands die, not from combat, but from sickness. The city finally surrenders. Louis VIII continues his march. But the sickness has taken hold. On his return journey, the king dies at Montpensier. He is 39 years old. The king is dead, but the French state does not falter. Louis IX, the future St. Louis, is a child. 12 years old, his mother, Blanche of Castile, rules as regent, and Blanche is a woman of iron will. She will not let the south slip away. She continues the war. But it is a war of attrition. Raymond VII cannot win a pitched battle. The French crown cannot afford to occupy every town. The conflict grinds to a halt. Raymond is excommunicated. His lands are ravaged. His people are exhausted. He is politically isolated. In 1229, he comes to Paris to negotiate. The treaty is called the Treaty of Paris, sometimes the Treaty of Mauparis. It is signed on April 12th, 1229. It is a total and complete political annihilation. Raymond VII is forced to perform public penance at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, barefoot, in a penitent's shirt. He is led by a papal legate and formally flogged before the altar. He must renounce all his claims to the territories conquered by Simon de Montfort. He is allowed to keep a portion of Toulouse, but the treaty's true genius is dynastic. Raymond's only heir is his daughter, Joan. The treaty stipulates that Joan must marry the king's brother, Alphonse of Poitiers. If they have no children, the entire county of Toulouse reverts to the French crown upon their death. Raymond has just signed away 400 years of his family's independence, but the Treaty of Paris does something else. Article 6. Raymond VII must actively pursue and exterminate the Cathar heresy in his lands. He must pay a sum for the maintenance of Catholic inquisitors in Toulouse. The military crusade is over. The police action is about to begin. The cavalry charges of Muret are replaced by the interrogation room. The lance and sword are replaced by the rack and the pyre. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issues 2 bulls, Ille Humani Generis and Licet ad Capiendos. He creates the Papal Inquisition. He takes the responsibility for rooting out heresy away from local bishops, who are often too slow, too political, or too sympathetic. He gives the power to Dominican and Franciscan friars, men educated in theology, zealous, mobile, answerable only to the Pope, men like Robert le Bougre, Bernard de Caux, and later, the most famous of all, Bernard Guy. These are the inquisitores, the heretic hunters. The war changes. It is no longer about besieging castles. It is about dismantling belief. The inquisitors arrive in a town. They announce a time of grace. Anyone who confesses to heresy and repents will receive a light penance. A pilgrimage, the wearing of 2 yellow crosses sewn onto their clothing, a badge of shame that makes them a social pariah. After the time of grace, the interrogations begin. Anonymous denunciations are encouraged. Neighbor turns on neighbor. Son turns on father. The inquisitors are meticulous record keepers. They build files. They cross-reference testimony. They know who attended a heretic sermon 20 years prior. They know who gave a piece of bread to a fleeing perfectus, the perfecti, the Cathar elite. The good men and good women are the primary target. If they are caught and refuse to recant, the penalty is absolute. The Inquisition does not execute. It is a church body. Instead, it against relaxes. The heretic to the Irish secular arm. The local lord, the royal authority. The secular arm then takes the prisoner, ties them to a stake, and burns them alive. For the Cathars, this is the ultimate test. They believe the body is a prison for the soul. Fire releases the soul. They call it the consolamentum, the final baptism. Many go to the flames singing. The Cathars are driven from the cities. They flee to the mountains, to the Pyrenees. They hide in remote forest villages. They take refuge in high, isolated castles. Castra like Caribus, Peripertus, and the most famous of all, Montségur. Perched on a limestone pog 4,000 feet high, Montségur becomes the last refuge. The spiritual capital of the dying faith, it is a fortress, but it is also a church. Hundreds of perfecti and credentes live there under the protection of Raymond de Toulouse, the local lord. For decades, it is untouchable. If you value documented history that explores the shift from open war to systemic suppression, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. By 1242, the French crown has had enough. Raymond VII, in a last desperate gamble, joins a revolt against King Louis IX. The revolt fails. His power is broken for good. The order is given to reduce Montségur. In the spring of 1243, a royal army arrives at the foot of the mountain. Perhaps 10,000 men. Hugues des Arcis, the king's seneschal for Carcassonne, commands the siege. The siege of Montségur lasts 10 months. It is an engineering impossibility. The fortress is impregnable to direct assault. The attackers build trebuchets, but the stones cannot reach the summit effectively. They blockade the mountain. Starvation is the only weapon. For months, the defenders hold out. They launch sorties. They repair their walls. But the blockade is total. Inside, food runs out. Water is scarce. The situation becomes desperate. In March 1244, and the end comes. The attackers, in a daring night operation, scale a sheer cliff face and capture a forward watchtower. From this new position, their trebuchet can finally hit the main fortress. The defenders know it is over. They negotiate a truce. 2 weeks, 15 days. The garrison is offered its life in exchange for surrender. But there is a condition. The perfecti, the heretics, must abjure their faith. They must confess to the inquisitors. For 2 weeks, the Cathar elite inside Montségur prepare. They pray, they fast, and they make a choice. On March 16th, 1244, the truce expires. The fortress gates open. The garrison marches out and surrenders. Then come the perfecti. Over 200 men and women. They have refused to recant, not one. They walk down the mountain, not as prisoners, but as willing martyrs. At the base of the Pog, the royal soldiers have built a massive pyre, a huge stockade of wood and straw. The perfecti are marched into the enclosure. The fire is lit. They are burned en masse. No individual stakes, just one great conflagration. The site is known to this day as the Prat dels Cremats, the field of the burned. The fall of Montségur is the end of Catharism as an organized religion. The military power that protected it was broken at Muret 3 decades earlier. The political structure that tolerated it was dismantled by the Treaty of Paris. Now, its spiritual leadership is ash. The faith survives, but only in secret. It becomes a fugitive creed, a peasant belief whispered in isolated hamlets. The Inquisition hunts the survivors relentlessly. The castle of Queribus falls in 1255. It is the last major stronghold. The hunt continues for decades. The final chapter is written by a man named Jacques Fournier. He is the Bishop of Pamiers. Later, he will become Pope Benedict XII. Between 1318 and 1325, Fournier conducts a rigorous, exhaustive inquisition in his small diocese. He is not a sadist. He is a terrifyingly efficient administrator. He interrogates everyone. He records everything. His register survives. We can read the words of the peasants of Montalu, their beliefs, their fears, their daily lives, their secret network of Cathar sympathizers. Fournier's investigation leads him to the last perfectus in Languedoc, a man named Guillaume Bellibaste. Bellibaste is a fugitive. He flees to Spain. He is a charismatic, if flawed, leader. He is eventually betrayed by a double agent, a man he trusted, dragged back to Carcassonne. He is tried. He refuses to recant. In 1321, Guillaume Bellibaste is taken to the castle courtyard at Villerouge Terminès. He is tied to the stake. As the flames rise, he is heard to shout a prophecy. In 700 years, the laurel will be green again. He is the last Cathar perfectus burned in Languedoc. The faith is dead. The victory. Simon de Montfort wins at Muret in 1213 is not for his family. His son Amaury dies with no male heir. The Montfort line in France ends. The victory is for the Capetian dynasty. Raymond VII dies in 1249. His daughter Joan and her husband Alphonse of Poitiers rule Toulouse. They die childless within days of each other in 1271, returning from crusade. As the Treaty of Paris dictated, the county of Toulouse, the vast territory of the House of Saint-Gilles, is absorbed into the Kingdom of France. It is no longer Languedoc, it is a province. The culture that Muret doomed is erased. The Occitan language, the Languedoc, the language of the troubadours, fades. It is replaced by the Northern langue d'oil. French law replaces local custom. The sophisticated, tolerant, independent civilization of southern France is gone. It is remade in the image of the North. The political consequences of Simon's charge are absolute. The theological consequences are just as profound. The Albigensian Crusade and the subsequent Inquisition create the tools, the legal framework, and the precedent for rooting out dissent. It is a template that will be used for centuries. If you value documented history that traces the long-term consequences of a single battle, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. When modern visitors go to Montségur, they see a ruin, a shell. The fortress there today is a later French border castle, but the foundations are the same. The pog is the same. They can stand on the Prat del Crémas and look up at the sheer walls. They can read the chronicles. They can read Jacques Fournier's register. The voices of the Cathars, the victims of the crusade that Muret decided, are preserved in the archives of their persecutors. The battle on September 12th, 1213, was not the end. It was the end of the beginning. It was the moment the military question was answered. The 900 horsemen of Simon de Montfort did not just kill a king. They did not just destroy an army. They ensured the destruction of a church and the end of a civilization.